A blessed afternoon to everyone. I am Dizon, the second reporter for this topic. From the early 20th century, researchers arguing if bilingual is actually beneficial or not, and there have come changes in our viewpoints about bilingualism. And it was believed that being bilingual is not an advantage. However, recent researchers have suggested that when a child develops from relatively balanced bilinguals, they tend to be cognitive advantages rather than disadvantages. Now, there are reasons why people believe that being bilingual is not beneficial, and this was the theory of balance from early 20th century. According to this theory, the two languages that a bilingual person speaks are like two balloons separate from each other since there is only a limited space in the brain. As the second language balloon increases the size, the first language balloon decreases proportionately, leading to a less functioning cognitive system and no transfer between the two balloons. Then they came up with a new theory called Common Underlying Proficiency Model of Bilingualism, or the think tank model of bilingualism. And the theory suggests that when I listen in English, it doesn't not just feed the English part of the brain. Instead, concept learned through one language transfer into use by the other language. So this means that teaching a child using one language does not mean that it has to be retaught in the second language. So there have been criticisms of this theory. First is, regardless of the language in which a person is operating, the thoughts that accompany talking, reading, writing, and listening come from the same integrated source and process of thinking. Second, child have the cognitive capacities to store and function in two or more languages. Third, concepts, understanding, and knowledge may be developed through two languages and not just one. Fourth, if children are expected to learn through an insufficiently developed second language, they may fail to understand and process. Fifth, if education is monolingual through a weaker language or bilingual, the language needs to be sufficiently advanced for the child to be able to understand the complex nature of the classroom learning. Next is the threshold theory. So the two ladders we see on the other sides are the two language of bilingual students may speak. The first threshold describes children whose current competence in both language is insufficiently developed, especially by comparison with their age group, or low level of competence in both language may have negative cognitive consequences. A child who cannot cope up with a classroom in either language is likely left behind. That is why children are taught in their more developed language or mother tongue. Next is the second threshold, or the middle floor, less balanced bilinguals. At this level, children have appropriate competence in one but not two languages. There are unlikely to be positive or negative cognitive consequences. Then, the top floor is the balanced bilinguals. At this level, children have age-appropriate competence in both language, and there are likely to be positive cognitive advantages. Next is, along with the idea of common underlying proficiency, or the think tank model, new hypothesis is introduced. According to this hypothesis, a child's competence in a second language depends on the level of competence in their first language. This hypothesis is supported by Proctor 2003, where a study showed that children with well-developed first language and second language perform better than the less balanced bilinguals. So Cummins differentiated surface fluency and the more evolved language skills required to benefit education process into BICS and CALP. BICS stands for Basic Interpersonal Communication Skills, where the language used for basic everyday conversation in the street, shop, and playground. This comes with plenty of the physical, visual, supports, gestures, and body language. Next is the CALP. CALP stands for Cognitive Academic Language Proficiency. This is the complex and abstract language of the classroom. This is in the curriculum language in mathematics, technology, science, humanities, and arts.
In the article, the threshold hypothesis applied to three language in contact at school by Lagabaster David, March 20, 2010, International Journal of Bilingualism Education and Bilingualism. So, dito sa article na ito, sinubukan nilang pag-aralan yung theory ni Cummins na threshold theory kung saan tinignan nila kung mas nag-a-advance ba sa academics yung mga bilingual kaysa sa monolingual. Pero dito sa article na ito, sinubukan nila sa mga estudyanteng trilingual. Pag sinabing trilingual, ito yung mga estudyanteng kayang magsalita ng tatlong language. So, sa kanilang pag-aaral na conclude nila na mas nag-a-advance yung mga estudyanteng trilingual kaysa sa monolingual. But then, mas mataas yung scores ng mga bilingual kaysa sa trilingual. It is because, sabi dito sa article na ito, na the more na mas maraming language na pinag-aaralan yung bata, the more na nahahati yung capacity ng brain niya. Sabi ko nga kanina, yung brain is meron siyang capacity kung hanggang saan yung limit niya. So, the more na maraming pinag-aaralang lingwahe yung bata, the more na nahahati yung capacity niya and hindi niya madedevelop yung iba. So, sinuggest nila na mag-stick na lang dun sa original na threshold theory na kung saan yung dalawang language na lang yung gagamitin ng bata and i-develop niya hanggang sa ma-master niya. Then, yung dalawang language na yon yung magagamit niya para mag-advance siya into academics. Socio-cultural theory of Lev Vygotsky. So, in this theory, social interaction plays an important role in development. So, dito, sinasabi na natututo ang bata through social interaction with others. So, the more na nakikipag-interact siya, the more na natututo yung bata. Dito din yung process ng Zone of Proximal Development or the ZPD. The distance between the actual development as determined by independent and the level of potential development as determined through problem solving under adult guidance or collaboration to more knowledgeable others. So, yung ZPD is nakakategorize into three. First is the current understanding. Ito yung kayang gawin ng bata ng mag-isa or independent. Next is the zone of proximal development, learns through scaffolding. Ito naman yung kayang gawin ng bata ng may assistance ng iba. So, dito nagpro-provide ng scaffolding. Pag sinabi natin scaffolding, the support given to the learner or in the child by more knowledgeable others. So, sino ba itong mga more knowledgeable others? So, these are the parents, teachers, and advanced peers. So, natututo yung bata kapag may assistance ng iba. Next is the out of the reach or out of reach. Ito naman yung hindi na kayang gawin ng bata. So, in the article, Mother Tongue, a necessary step to intellectual development, Journal of Pan-Pacific Association of Applied Linguistics, Noor Mohammadi, R. 2008. So dito sa article na ito, in-emphasize nila kung gaano kahalaga yung social interaction sa pag-acquire ng bata ng language. So dito sinabi na kapag ang bata ay nakikipag-interact sa iba, natututo siyang magsalita at nade-develop yung kanyang language. Dahil yung ginagamit natin in communication or interaction is language. So habang patuloy or habang nakikipag-interact yung bata sa iba, the more na natututo siya ng language. So dito, kinakailangan din daw ng scaffolding. So sinusuportahan din yung bata ng more knowledgeable others sa pagkatuto niya ng language. For example, nung bata tayo, 'di ba, hindi pa naman tayo marunong magsalita. So, nag-provide din ng scaffolding yung mga more knowledgeable others sa atin. Halimbawa, yung ating parents, tinuruan nila tayo ng mga words or simple sentences kung kaya't natuto tayo. Then after nun, nung pumunta na tayo or in school, ang nag-provide naman ng scaffolding sa atin is yung teacher natin na kung saan yung natutunan nating mga words and sentences dati with our parents is na-form na into uh, complicated sentences and paragraphs. So, ganun din in acquiring language. Kinakailangan ng support ng iba para matuto yung bata. So, dito, sa theory ito, yung language daw ay may dalawang specific roles. First is communication. Communication is important in the transmission of culture. So, ginagamit or dito sa theory na ito, ginagamit daw yung language through communication and sa pagtuturo ng culture ng bata. So, once na natuto yung bata in language, kaya niya nang matutunan yung kanyang culture. Next is regulation. Regulation is important in gaining control over one's own cognitive process. So, example nito is yung ating thoughts and memory. So, gumagamit din tayo ng language kapag nag-iisip tayo and kapag ginagamit natin yung ating memory.
Albert Bandura, Social Learning Theory. People can learn new information and behavior by watching other people. The process of modeling, observing, and imitation, and also the vicarious learning. So dito sa theory na ito, natututo daw ang isang bata sa pag-observe niya sa kanyang model and sa pag-imitate ng ibang tao. So, alam ko familiar na kayo in Bobodal experiment na kung saan nag-gather sila ng group of children, then inilagay sa isang room kasama ng isang model and isang Bobodal. So, yung isang, or yung model, ang ginawa niya sa kanyang Bobodal is pinagsisipa niya, pinagtatadyak niya, tsaka pinagsasalitaan niya ng masama. Then, umalis siya sa room. So, ang nangyari, yung mga naiwang estudyante, kung ano yung ginawa ng model sa Bobodal, ganun din yung ginawa nila. So with that, masasabi na dito sa theory na ito, natututo ang bata sa pag-observe niya sa ibang tao and sa pag-imitate ng mga ginagawa nila. So sa article na Examining Skinner's and Bandura's Ideas on Language Acquisition, Implication for the Teacher by Dr. Wellington Samkange. Children observe and listen to the others speak and acquire language skills. So, ganun din daw sabi sa article na ito, ganun din natututo yung bata ng language through observation and imitation. So, kung ano yung nakikita at naririnig ng bata sa ibang tao na mga salita, yun din yung kanyang ginagaya at dun siya natututo. So, dito sa article na ito, they suggest na since ang bata natututo siya through observation and imitation, dapat magkaroon sila ng tamang model, right model for the children. Nang sa ganun, kung tama yung model nila, tama din yung mai-imitate ng bata na language. So, sino ba itong mga pwedeng maging model? The teacher can be a model. As such, the teacher has to ensure that he or she uses language properly. So, since ang bata, mas maraming oras na inilalaan sa school, so probably ang nagiging model nila is ang teacher. So, dapat ang teacher gumagamit siya ng tamang language nang sa ganun, yung ma-imitate ng kanyang mga estudyante is tamang language or salita din. So, in this article, they emphasize the importance ng modeling, imitation, and reinforcement. Sabi dito sa article na ito na ang bata natututo ng language through modeling. So, meron silang tinitignan na kanilang model na kung saan they observe kung ano yung ginagawa nila. Then, kapag may nakita sila, they imitate kung ano yung ginagawa ng model nila and the process of reinforcement kung saan kapag maganda yung nagaya ng bata, pwede mo siyang bigyan ng positive reinforcement na kung saan bibigyan mo siya ng reward. Kung saan kapag ang bata naman is ang nagaya niya is hindi maganda, so dapat mo siyang bigyan ng negative reinforcement na kung saan bibigyan mo siya ng punishment. So with that process daw, na, ganun natututo ang bata ng language sa theory or process ni Bandura na social learning theory. Behaviorism by Watson, Pavlov, and Skinner. So, merong dalawang proponents ang behaviorism. First is the classical conditioning, a learning process by which a subject comes to respond in a specific way to a previously neutral stimulus after the subject repeatedly encounters the neutral stimulus together with another stimulus that already elicits the response. So, alam ko familiar na kayo sa experiment ni Pavlov sa kanyang dog and si Watson sa kay Little Albert. So dito sa classical conditioning, ito yung ine-emphasize yung process ng stimulus and response. Next is the operant conditioning, a learning process in which the likelihood at a specific behavior is increased or decreased through positive and negative reinforcement each time the behavior is exhibited so that the subject comes to associate the pleasure or displeasure of the reinforcement with the behavior. So, dito naman sa operant conditioning, nagpo-focus siya sa reinforcement na kapag tama yung ginawa or na-imitate ng bata, binibigyan siya ng reward. Kapag hindi naman tama yung na-imitate niya, binibigyan siya ng punishment. So, in the article, Behaviorist Theory on Language Learning and Acquisition, pinaliwanag nila kung paano natututo ang bata ng language through behaviorist theory. So, it is clear that language learning and its development for the behaviorist is a matter of conditioning by means of imitation, practice, reinforcement, and habituation, which constitute the basis of language acquisition. So, sinabi sa article na ito na ang bata natututo ng language through imitation. Ginagaya niya yung mga salita or language ng mga nasa paligid niya. Then, sa panggagaya niyang yun, nagkakaroon ng reinforcement. Kapag ang bata, nagaya niya is maganda, nagkakaroon siya ng reward. Kung hindi naman maganda yung na-imitate niya, is nagkakaroon siya ng punishment na kung saan paulit-ulit na ginagawa and napapractice na nagiging habit na. So, sa ganung paraan daw natututo ang bata ng language. Sabi dito sa article na ito. So, children learn language as they do any other behavior. They mimic the language patterns of those around them, responding to the reward and punishment that follows from correct and incorrect usages respectively. So, dito sa article na ito, they suggest the trial and error process in which acceptable utterances are reinforced by comprehension and approval, and the unacceptable utterances are inhibited by the lack of reward. So, hindi porket yung bata is ang na-imitate niya hindi maganda, papatigilin or titigil na siya sa pag-imitate. Kung hindi, paulit-ulit or trial and error process until he gradually learns to make finer and finer discrimination until his utterances approximately more and more closer to the speech of the community in which he is growing up. To put in the other words, children develop a natural affinity to learn the language of their social surroundings whose important boost over language learning and teaching must never be underestimated. In this respect, behaviorist theory stresses the fact that human and animal learning is a process of habit formation, a highly learning complex task. In this theory, it may be learned by being broken down into small habits. This or thus it is clear that the acquisition of learning is governed the acquisition of other habits.